as part of the work, and I'll hand over to Julia. Thank you.
Okay, so Emily asked me to give about a 15-minute introduction to the topic in general. So I've got some slides. If I just go ahead and share my screen, I think. And you should be able to see my slides. Can you see those? Yep, excellent. So our starting point for this session then is an article that appeared in The Guardian in October 2020, which reported evidence of university students being ridiculed over their accents and their backgrounds at some of the country's leading universities. So I want to start by sharing some of those comments that students made. And the first one you can see here from Nina, who's from Stockton-on-Tees. It really resonated with me because I'm from Stockton-on-Tees in the northeast of England. And I had a similar experience actually to Nina 20 years ago when I went to university, and kind of that feeling that the way I was speaking marked me out as being, well, thick, I felt, or common. And what she says there about feeling that she doesn't belong, that she'd somehow got there by mistake, a feeling of otherness, of imposter syndrome. These are really, you know, deep feelings, and they can stay with you a long time. So this is something we need to take account of. And that second quotation there, Christopher from the Black Country, who, you know, really felt demoralized by the reaction to his accent, to others not wanting him to participate in their group. And it led to him trying to hide his accent. Some more comments here. So Rachel from Scarborough. Now this is particularly, well, worrying, I think, because this was not another student, but one of this person's lecturers who said to them, "You'll never get anywhere talking like that. It makes you sound stupid." Or when you use like, you sound like a teenager. No one will take you seriously. And obviously that's really worrying to me, that a member of academic staff would have those kinds of ideas and would communicate them in that way. And then that final one, Emily from South Tyneside, who went to university in Durham. Now she's gone to university, effectively her home university, so she speaks with the local accent, but she still found herself subject to prejudice and ridicule. And this is really significant. She said she purposely did not speak out of fear, despite having done all the preparatory reading, and this debilitating feeling that you get when you want to join in the debate in your seminar and you want to offer analysis, but you don't, because not of what you're saying, but how you're saying it. Now, to me, that's really important, because it's very important to the learning process that students feel able, comfortable to participate to seminar discussions. So if perceptions of accent are holding us back from that, then we absolutely need to address that. So these kinds of experiences are worrying, I think, especially if they are as widespread as this Guardian article suggests. We don't have any really systematic data on this within the University of Leeds currently, but some of my colleagues in the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies did run a survey with their students. And one of the questions that they asked there was about whether students had experienced accent bias at university. Now, thankfully, 47% of them said they'd never experienced this. However, 41% said they had experienced accent bias at least some of the time, with 10% saying they'd experienced it very often. Now, I think that should give us pause for thought. What I want to do today is think about where that bias is coming from, and also how we can address it. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to pose a question to you, and it might be, is everything all right? Sorry, I could see someone kind of gesticulating. Can you still hear me okay? I think Amy,
I'm so sorry, Julia. I've had a carpet fitter who was just leaving.
Oh, okay.
And so I was just waving and trying to listen.
Sorry, I thought you were trying to get my attention. Okay, so this question is one you might feel that you don't want to answer now, having heard some of those students' experiences of accent bias. I'm not going to ask you to vocalise a response, but the question is, are there any accents or language varieties that you particularly like or dislike? So, you know, if we were in a normal seminar and we had more time, we might discuss this question and think about your likes and dislikes. I'm not going to get you to vocalize them now. Really, the reason I'm posing this question is simply to make clear that we all have these likes and dislikes. And I would say there isn't anything particularly wrong with having those preferences. as long as we know where they come from, and that we also understand how those views might influence our own actions and behaviours. Now, we also need to recognise that these views about language circulate very widely, including in the public domain, where there is really remarkable consistency around the kinds of views expressed. And when we get large sections of the population agreeing about which language varieties are good and which language varieties are bad, then we really have to start to think about where those trends come from and what their implications are. So I'm going to share with you a few examples that were reported in the national press because they're related to public figures. So you may recognise this person. This is Angela Rayner. She is a member of the Shadow Cabinet and currently Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Now, she regularly receives abuse about her Stockport accent. So following an appearance on Channel 4, the Huffington Post reports that she received lots of emails criticising her for her accent. Amongst these were comments like, "You sound as thick as mince and seem to be devoid of any original thought," or "If you wanted to represent Northerners as thick individuals, then well done, you have succeeded." Likewise, Leanne Woods, a Welsh politician, posted to her Facebook page that she'd received an email about her accent, and it read, "When speaking English with a Welsh accent, it can be delightful to listen to someone." Okay, great. However, a broad Welsh accent, as often used by Leanne Woods, leaves speakers open to ridicule. Leanne Woods' response was, "I'm not prepared to pretend to be something I'm not. If they don't like it, they can stick it." We'll come back to that response later. But adding these examples to those experiences we saw at the start of the talk from university students tells us that there still seems to be quite a lot of stigma around regional accents of English. But actually, the evaluative profiles of regional accents are a bit more complex than that, and we have to take account of this complexity. So at the same time as Leanne Wood's Welsh accent is being ridiculed, we also have this story where apparently the same Welsh accent is credited with winning new business in Newport. So you can see here pictured the chief executive of a company offering funeral planning products. And he explained that one major factor in Newport winning the contract for a new funeral call centre was the empathetic and consoling Welsh accent, which the company said was important for its market. So now we've got a sense that there are some positive characteristics associated with these accents too. We'll come back to that. As a point of interest, in winning this contract, Newport beat off competition from Teesside, which is where I'm from, and is an accent that tends to be quite heavily stigmatised. So all of these news stories are kind of anecdotal, but they do provide us with some interesting inroads for discussion and further inquiry. And the first question I want to ask is, where do these attitudes come from? Why do they arise? Now, most people, if you ask them, will say that their judgments about accents are based purely on aesthetic values, that they just simply think that some accents sound better, nicer, more aesthetically pleasing, while other accents sound nasal, flat, lazy, and so on. This is what we would refer to as the inherent value hypothesis, and it's the idea that some languages or language varieties are just inherently more attractive, more aesthetically pleasing than others, and hence quite naturally, quite properly gain status over other accents. Now, sociolinguists like me do not believe the inherent values hypothesis. We think it's a social myth. Actually, there are very few, if any, inherent values attached to these different patterns of pronunciation. Instead, we believe that aesthetic judgments of accents reflect the social standing of their imagined representative speakers. So in other words, evaluations of accent are really just evaluations of the speakers we associate with that accent or the places where those speakers are from. So this is the social connotations hypothesis, and it helps us to understand and explain some of the remarkably consistent findings that have emerged from research into language attitudes. So sociolinguistic experiments have consistently shown over a really long period of time that those who speak received pronunciation This is the accent that you'd tend to hear from BBC newsreaders. It's the accent associated with the so-called elite in our society. So those who use this accent, receive pronunciation, tend to be rated as more intelligent and more competent than those of us who speak a regional accent, even by people who speak a regional accent. So people who speak RP, receive pronunciation, are often taken more seriously. And when people listen to it, they rate these speakers more highly for characteristics like ambition, intelligence, confidence, determination, all those personality traits that are associated with high social status. So just let's apply the social connotations hypothesis to help us understand why RP is evaluated in this way. Well, to do that, I'll just take us back in time a little bit. So in the 19th century, when these ideas were emerging, it became the norm for parents in the highest social classes to send their sons to one of a small number of public schools like Eton. Now at these schools, the boys would associate with other boys from a very similar social class background, and they would all conform to the same accent. This is the accent that was first documented as public school pronunciation, but was then later termed received pronunciation, or RP. Now, the boys from these schools went on to study at Oxford and Cambridge, and from there, they went on to take up high status positions in public society. So these people had high status, prestige, and authority. Now, when a particular way of speaking, in this case RP, comes to be associated with particular types of people, in this case, public school boys who go on to hold very high status positions in society, then that way of speaking comes to be associated with the kind of characteristics we stereotypically associate with the people. And it comes to be seen to just have those characteristics quite naturally. So this is why RP itself came to be heard as sounding authoritative, prestigious, statusful. And then that accent became the accent incorporated as the accent of the BBC. So when the BBC first emerged, this was the accent of newsreaders on the BBC. And therefore the accent then took on some of those characteristics commonly associated with the BBC, like respectability, reliability. Now, obviously today, it's no longer the case that only that people who go to high status universities only speak RP. And it's not the case that BBC News readers only use RP. However, those old associations between RP and status, prestige, authority, respectability are still there. So that's why we get those characteristics now. Now, at the same time as received pronunciation was being constructed as the accent of the elite, regional accents were being associated with the lower social classes and therefore with lower social status. And that's why in the same language attitudes research, what we see is that accents typical of low status speakers tend to be quite heavily stigmatized and rated low relative to RP for things like intelligence and competence. Now, these are often accents in industrial, urban areas of the country, like Birmingham and Teesside. So these are some of the accents that those students reported in the Guardian article was speaking. And there's a sense in which the accent becomes associated with the kind of apparent, perceived low social status of the speakers who speak it, but also with the places which are urban, industrial, perceived as being kind of dirty, characterized by crime and heavy unemployment. Now, I'm not saying that's my impression of those places, because it isn't, but that's a general idea that people have. And all of those associations come to transfer on to the accent, hence the negative evaluations of the accent. At the same time, though, some regional accents are rated more positively than RP when it comes to social attractiveness traits, things like friendliness, sense of humour, trustworthiness, warmth. So the Yorkshire accent tends to do very well for that kind of thing. Two key dimensions appear to underpin these kinds of evaluations: status and solidarity. So on the one hand, we have RP associated with status, influence, power, and control. Ratings along this dimension for things like intelligence, competence, ambition, tend to reflect the dominant socioeconomic status of the groups in society who usually speak RP. The solidarity dimension, on the other hand, reflects the social pressures to adhere to and support one's own social group and maintain its linguistic variety. And it's along this dimension that regional speakers tend to do quite well, being rated highly for factors like friendliness, sense of humour, those kind of more solidary characteristics. All of this helps us to explain and understand evaluations that were made about Leanne Wood's accent and also her reaction to it. So she is more concerned with signalling her local roots and solidarity with the local community than with displaying social status. And there are clearly issues of authenticity here too. Equally, Angela Rayner is from and speaks as though she is from Stockport. She wants to mark her loyalty to that local area and identify with her constituents and with local values. Now, in many ways, the kind of abuse Angela Rayner gets seems strange at a time when politicians are routinely criticised for being out of touch with their constituents. But as a sociolinguist, it doesn't surprise me because attitudes towards language are really deeply rooted in our society and they're surprisingly conservative. They've endured for this really long period of time. In the political domain, in which issues of authority and status come into play, accents like Angela Rayner's are downgraded, which explains why she gets abuse, saying that she sounds thick. But in other domains, where the dimension of solidarity is more important than that of status, both the Welsh accent and the Stockport accent are likely to be more favourably evaluated. And that explains why that Welsh call centre was awarded in Wales, because of this idea that the accent there was friendly and empathetic. It may be a bit more complicated than this though, because actually Angela Rayner is not the only member of the Shadow Cabinet to have had a regional accent. Now we have to start thinking about issues to do with gender and also to do with social class. So by her own admission, Angela Rayner is from a working class background, from a council estate. She's really proud of those roots, but she says actually it has led to her being stigmatised within the political domain. So we have to start asking ourselves questions like, which social groups tend to be the targets of linguistic discrimination? Well, it tends to be working class speakers, ethnic minorities, women, sometimes young people. Which social groups benefit? Well, those who are in positions of power and who speak RP and therefore have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. So we have to start asking these questions and thinking about what it tells us about our society. And we begin to see that attitudes towards language stand in for other socially embedded forms of prejudice, including class-based prejudice, sexism, and racism. And it's clearly very important that we address these. Now, in particular, if these biases come into play when companies are recruiting for jobs, then that would have really serious issues for social inclusion and social mobility. This is something that the Accent Bias Britain project set out to investigate with regards to the law profession. So I won't go into lots of detail about this. The link is there if you're interested in reading more about their results. But just to say that one of the experiments that they did involved asking 61 lawyers and graduate recruiters in leading UK law firms to complete a mock hiring exercise. So they heard interview questions from speakers with different accents, who also gave different kinds of responses. Some were good responses, some were bad responses. Now, really encouragingly, what this project found is that these recruiters were able to rate the quality of an answer independently of the candidate's accent. So they were able to focus on what the candidate said. So that's really good news. And in addition, this project found that when recruiters were alerted to the existence of accent bias in advance, then the kind of differential ratings they made of speakers with different accents were also reduced. So they advocate that all companies' recruiters should go through accent bias awareness training, that actually that would help ensure that we don't get this kind of accent bias in the recruiting process. So it does look as if there's some kind of light at the end of the tunnel with regards to accent discrimination in the workplace. And that's really important, because if we get greater diversity of accents within the career professions, then that will become the norm, and we can start to break that link between received pronunciation and high status professions, and therefore between RP and characteristics like intelligence and competence, and therefore we can break that converse link between regional accents and sounding thick. So the answer, and I really want to stress this, is not for us regional speakers to change the way we speak. That's really important, because if we do that, what we'd be doing is just reinforcing that link between RP and high status and regional accents and low status. And therefore, in effect, we'd also be reinforcing kind of class and other forms of bias that are associated with it. So it's not for us to change the way that we speak. Angela Rayner certainly isn't someone who wants to change the way she speaks. And I just wanted to very quickly play you, if I can, and if it works, here we go, this clip.
Didn't a bit of you think, oh, I'm really enjoying this? I'm enjoying being up to face with Boris Johnson asking him a question. I'd quite like to be doing this job.
Do you know what? The part of me that thought, you know what, for any council house kid out there who was told he was never good enough, I stood there, and I stood there for every woman from a working class background with an accent who was probably told they wasn't good enough and said, we are good enough. Look what I was able to do to that Etonian posh boy.
We're going to have to leave it there. Angela.
So I wanted to share that with you, because Angela Rayner hasn't changed the way she speaks. And actually, this is really important, because when we get to see people like her standing in as she was then in Prime Minister's questions, she was able to really stick it to Boris Johnson, the Etonian posh boy, and she could do that with her Stockport accent. So we need to see more of that. However, Angela Rayner left school at 16, she didn't go to university, and so she wasn't subject to those kinds of experiences that I set out at the start of this talk. And I want to go back to those comments that some students have made, because if there are issues related to accent bias and discrimination within the university, we really need to tackle these. In particular, if those issues cause students to not want to participate in seminar settings or in group presentations, then that is really significant. Actually, another one of my research interests has been in the use of talk for learning. And what the research shows is that it's really important to participate in talk, in dialogue, in order to learn, but also to improve our general cognitive abilities. So actually, if students are not participating, then that will be detrimental to their education and to their future job prospects, even if we get rid of accent discrimination in the workplace. So that's why it's really, really important to have these kinds of discussions and to think about ways that we can tackle any accent prejudice that is there in the university. So I'm really interested to hear what people have got to say. Thank you. I will stop sharing.